Welcome to The Whole Itself Remains. I'm your host, Todd Caldecott, and you're listening to CJMP Co-op Radio 90.1 FM, broadcasting from the Cathet region on the beautiful Sunshine Coast of British Columbia on the traditional territory of the Common People. The show is also available on YouTube and your favorite podcasting platform. So today I want to examine the role of breakfast, not just as a meal, but as a metabolic and neurological intervention. And then after this segment, I'm going to be speaking with today's guest, Sajah Popham, herbalist, alchemist, teacher, and author of the wonderful book, Evolutionary Herbalism. Okay, so today I want to talk about breakfast. If you were to ask me, Todd, what is the single most important intervention that you can think of that will bring about the most important and powerful changes in someone's life, it would be breakfast. Absolutely, and I want to explain why. So I was reminded of this recently when I came across a study. It was a meta-analysis, and what it found across a large population of people, I think there were like close to 120,000 people in this observational study, included countries such as the US, Korea, I think Iran. So across the world, it consistently found that people who skipped breakfast had a higher risk of metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome, if you remember, is that cluster of conditions that increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia, etc. And we can identify it by looking at things such as your blood work. For example, we'll typically see elevations in triglycerides, elevations in fasting blood glucose. We'll see elevations in blood pressure. We'll see abdominal or visceral adiposity. It's quite a common problem, and we talked about it before. So people that skip breakfast on a regular basis have a higher risk of metabolic syndrome. And that isn't any surprise to me because of the importance that breakfast has in terms of promoting metabolic and neurological balance. Okay, so when we're sleeping, we're fasting, we're not consuming any calories, and then we get up in the morning and it's time to replenish the body. According to Ayurveda, our digestion and metabolism is modeled on the path of the sun across the sky, right? So our digestion, our metabolism is at its peak at midday. And so that means our digestion and metabolism is increasing towards midday and then decreasing as we move towards evening. And that means that you want to eat primarily on the ascent of that curve. That's when your sensitivity to insulin is at its highest, whereas in the evening, when your metabolism is slowing, your sensitivity to insulin is at its lowest. So you want to eat on the ascent of that curve. And ideally, you want to eat foods that promote metabolic and neurological stability, so foods that digest slowly. All that you need to know about what type of food to put in your body is the same amount of care and attention you would use to take care of your wood stove to heat your home. And I realize not many of you use a wood stove necessarily, but you might have seen it. You've probably set a fire before, so you have some idea what I'm talking about. In the morning when you wake up and your stove is cold with some glowing embers in there, you don't just use kindling and paper to heat your home. For sure, it'll ignite and maybe it'll generate a little bit of heat for a few minutes, but it'll exhaust itself very quickly. That makes no sense. Instead, you put in some heavy, dense fuel, some birch, sorry, my cat just sneezed, some cherry wood, some larch, Douglas fir, whatever it is. That will ignite and it'll burn slowly all day long. That is what you're looking for in terms of diet. And that primarily is going to be primarily fats and proteins because they're not immediately turned into sugar in your body, right? Which dries up insulin levels, which then reduces blood sugar, causing hypoglycemia. Now, most people, when they get up in the morning, this is what they eat. They have an ultra-processed diet of cereals, of toast and jam, of sweetened yogurts, of sugary sweet coffees. And, they don't have much time. I get it. You got to go to work. So you get up, you fire back some carbs, and then off you go. And then they crash, right? That's what used to happen to me. Many years ago, when my kids were little, I would feed them oatmeal, so a healthier version of that, with chopped up apples, some almonds, a little bit of maple syrup. I would eat that. I would go to work. I'd see my first patient, but then within an hour, I would crash. And then I had to run across the street and scarf down a muffin and a coffee to get my energy back up again, and then proceed to tell my patient not to do exactly what I just did. So about 27 years ago, I changed all that after examining what is it that people traditionally eat for breakfast, right? It wasn't a rapidly digesting carbohydrate-rich diet. It wasn't that ultra-processed foods diet, which this new study coming out with The Lancet published this review. These 3 different papers showed that the ultra-processed food diet, what most people typically eat for breakfast, is toxic to every single organ in the body. Right? So it makes sense to eat a protein, fat-rich breakfast that will stabilize your blood sugar. And that's something I've been recommending for years. But there is a caveat. Okay, so these, no doubt, are important fuels. They will support neurological stability. It's been proven to me many, many times. For example, I remember having a patient many years ago. She was a vegan. She essentially was healthy. She was a yoga teacher. She was a dancer, but she'd suffered from crippling anxiety for 18 years and also infertility issues for the last 13. And she came to me and said, I've tried everything. I've tried all the herbs. I've tried all the supplements. Nothing works. What can you do for me? And I looked at her and I was like, all right, I want you to have lamb stew for breakfast every morning. Every morning. And she was like, I'm a vegan. And I'm like, I get it, but this is what you need, okay? And she listened to me. I'm very convincing. So she listened to me, and then she called me up 4 days later and said, this is really weird, but I don't have anxiety. It's gone. And then she called me up another few days later and said, I'm getting changes in my cervical mucus. I'm ovulating. She hadn't ovulated in 13 years. All it took was 1 week of a protein, fat-rich diet to achieve this end. You know, I've worked with a lot of kids with ADHD, and I would say about 80% of kids that get this provisional diagnosis don't actually have anything really serious. But when I look at what they're eating for breakfast, they're all eating these rapidly digesting sweet breakfasts, pancakes and waffles, oatmeal with maple syrup, breakfast cereal. And they crash out like I used to do when I would go to work after eating this way. And so you give those kids a slow digesting, fat, protein-rich breakfast, all of a sudden, a lot of their ADHD problems just resolve. It doesn't mean they might not have some of those issues still, but they're not disruptive in class. They're not behaving impulsively. They're able to get their work done. Their grades go up. They're functional, right? So what we put into our bodies isn't just a matter of maintaining metabolic balance. It's also promoting neurological stability. But as I said, this caveat, I mentioned it earlier, this really important caveat, when you're eating these really dense fuels, like any fuel, even the best fuel, you put it in your wood stove, it's going to generate waste, smoke, and you're going to vent it out of the house. You have to deal with the waste product, the metabolic detritus, the free radicals that are generated with energy production. Okay? So when you eat these heavy-duty foods, you will generate free radicals. What do you do with them? Well, your body maintains a vast storehouse of antioxidants that quench these free radicals. And where do we get these antioxidants? We get them from plant-based foods, right? All the polyphenols, all those different constituents, those bright colored pigments, they all function as antioxidants to quench these free radicals. And we know, this study shows that if we are eating a net inflammatory diet, it accelerates brain aging. It increases the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So you don't want to do that. You know, in herbal medicine, we talk about the yin and the yang, the balance of opposites. And this is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to your breakfast. So by all means, eat that heavy-duty, protein, fat-rich breakfast, but make sure that you pair it with these antioxidant plant foods to maintain balance and prevent inflammation. Next up, my interview with Sajah Popham. So Sajah is author of the book Evolutionary Herbalism and is founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. He trains herbalists in a holistic system of plant medicine that encompasses clinical Western herbalism, medical astrology, Ayurveda, and spagyric alchemy. His teachings embody a heartfelt respect, honor, and reverence for the vast intelligence of plants in a way that empowers us to look deeper into the nature of our medicines and ourselves. He lives on a homestead in the foothills of Mount Baker, Washington, with his wife and children, where he teaches, consults, and prepares spagyric herbal medicines. Sajah, thanks so much for joining me today on The Whole Itself Remains.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Todd. It's great to be here.
So I've admired you and your work for such a long time. You're definitely one of the experts and have this specialty in alchemy, which is so fascinating and so interesting, and medical astrology too. So I thought you'd be a perfect guest for the pod. And this season, what I'm doing is I'm asking folks about holism. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's your working definition of holism?
That's a great question. Well, it's funny. This is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because we see, especially in the realm of herbal medicine, you see the word holistic used a lot in the alternative medicine industry. It's just holistic, 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 everything, everywhere. And I've really taken a lot of time to sit and think about what does that really mean? You know, what
Mm,
does holistic really mean? I find in I guess the conventional world, like outside the realm of alternative medicine, a lot of times people think, oh, holistic medicine, that's like vitamins and minerals and herbs, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like a thought of holistic is what type of remedy you use. And I think it goes a lot deeper than that. So to me, when I think of the concept of holistic in the context of herbal medicine, well, I think there's the orientation towards the person and thinking about and approaching working with a person that is not just focused on their symptom or their disease or their pathological pattern, but really looking at what's underneath that. Like, how is the symptom or the expression of dis-ease a superficial expression of something that's going on a much deeper level. And that deeper level is not always necessarily strictly physiological in nature, that there is not a separation between the body, the emotional state, the psychological state, or what in alchemy would be thought of as the soul or the sulfur of the person, that the essence of the person, that we tend to think of these as very separate, distinct parts of the self. But in a lot of traditional models, as you well know, these are not separate. That the body is, in alchemy, they say it's like the body is the most fixed part of the soul, and the soul is the most volatile part of the body, but they're not separate from one another. So for the orientation towards the person, we think of the whole person, right? The classic body, mind, spirit kind of way of thinking. But I think there's ways that that can actually be applied a lot more practically in a therapeutic context, which is really where, for me, the medical astrology piece comes in. So then there's the plant. And I think there's a holistic understanding of the plant that's very similar with the person, where the chemistry of the plant is really the most fixed or material expression of a more subtle aspect of an herb, what we might think of as the spirit or the soul of the plant. And so in alchemy, we see that the plant is, like all things in creation, as a triune nature. So there's a sulfur, a mercury, and a salt within the plant, and the chemistry and the way it impacts the body is really just 1/3 of that. And that in the alchemical tradition, the plants are really seen as having a psychological impact as well as an influence on what we might think of as the soul's evolution, or the development of the essential part of the self in its striving towards, we might think of as unity, or a deeper expression of connection with creation, with life, and with the essence of the self. And so the plants are really seen in this transformational context. So we have the whole person, we have the whole plant. But for me, the beauty of the alchemical system is that it takes that wholeness concept to this whole other level, pun slightly intended, where we're seeing the plant and the person not in isolation, but we're seeing that plants and people are microcosms of the fundamental forces of life and of creation. That there's a macrocosm, the pattern of creation in the macrocosm is present, is mirrored within a person and within a plant. And so the part contains the pattern of the whole. And that's really, to me, that's my definition of wholeness, is seeing the relationship of the pattern of the macrocosm of the whole present within an expression of the microcosm. In my case, it's usually within a person or within a plant. So that tends to be the way I think of wholeness or holistic.
Yeah, that's such a comprehensive answer. It's clear that you've done a lot of thinking about the subject, and no doubt informed by all of your experience in the world of alchemy. But I'm sure you didn't come out like that. I'm sure you came onto this earth just like the rest of us schmucks. And I'm just kind of wondering, what was it for you that drove you to this field of holism? Like, you could have chosen to do any number of things, I'm sure. But was there something? There was some epiphany? Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be a doctor. I always knew that I was here to help other people in a medicinal capacity in some way, shape, or form. It changed different expressions. I was like planning on going conventional med, and I wanted to be a surgeon. I was either neurosurgery or cardiovascular surgery, and then in my family, I had really seen a lot of, I guess we could say, botched experiences with conventional medicine, right? Where they had gone to conventional medicine and were made significantly worse in a lot of instances. And I just kind of had this disillusionment around conventional allopathic medicine. And then I would say like late teenage years, early 20s, I just became more, I guess, earth centered, naturally oriented. My parents would probably say I turned into a hippie, and I just became more naturally oriented.
Hmm.
And me, it was my time in nature in the forest and with the plants, and just I had a number of experiences of just feeling a sense of a connection to something greater than myself, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't have uh, a language for it. I didn't have any sort of framework for how to understand these kind of experiences that I was having in nature, just sitting quietly with the plants in beautiful places in the natural world. And I don't really talk about this too much, but when I was in college, I did a class. Um, it was philosophy of religion.
Hmm.
And that really opened my mind up because I had a really good instructor, and we would study all the different religions. And then towards the end of the course, she started talking about mysticism and how underneath many of those religions is this fundamental principle of the mystical experience of an experience of unity. And I'd never heard anything like that. And I was like, wow, like that feels like it's kind of describing what I feel like I'm experiencing when I'm out in nature. Not that I'm having this, like, I'm not like merging with the essence of creation out there, but I am having an experience of something greater than myself. And that really kind of led me down the path of healing, but the spirit behind healing, that there's a spirituality connected to the healing journey, and that connected to nature ultimately led me to herbal medicine. And when I was studying at Bastyr University, that was where I was first introduced to concepts of Ayurveda through, I did some coursework with KP Khalsa there. And that was like, oh, whoa, okay, there's not just this mystical experience, but there's like an order to the cosmos. There's an order to creation that is a part of a medical tradition. Like, what? This is amazing. And then I found alchemy, which I saw a lot of similarity and overlap between alchemy and some of the teachings of Ayurveda, and that was really what opened everything up for me, and seeing that I wanted to be holistic in my approach. I didn't want to just be a green allopath, or like I didn't want to just put herbal band-aids on things. I
Hmm.
really wanted people to heal, and I think it was that for me too. And I would work with the plants. I would heal myself through those plants. I would look back and I would realize, like, I'm changed. Like, it's not just like, oh, I feel a little bit better, but it's like, no, I feel different. Like, my state of mind is different. My physical, the way I feel in my body is different. Like, I feel like a new person. That's transformation. That's the kind of healing I want to be able to share with the people that I would like to be of service to. So that's really been kind of my driving force, and I think that the concept of holistic really is at the center of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely a man with a purpose, but you're also very unique in how you approach the subject. Your focus on alchemy is fascinating to me. Of course, I have some experience with using some alchemical medicines as prepared in Ayurveda, and I know that you have a lot of respect for them. It's a different tradition, but certainly allied with what you do. So tell me a little bit about your journey into alchemy, because folks like me, we get into herbal medicine, but we don't necessarily get into alchemy. What was it for you?
Yeah. Well, it really started, I always like to joke around and say that it kind of started with guilt. When I
Okay.
would be in the herb medicine lab in at Bastyr, we're learning how to just do basic herbal extractions, right? Infusions and decoctions and tinctures and acetates and all that stuff. There was always that moment where I have to compost the herb. And I always
Hmm.
felt really guilty. There was always this
Ah,
sense that there's more medicine in that plant that I'm not extracting. There's something more in there that's missing from this medicine. That's like, to me, it was like, if I'm going to be holistic, I want to have a medicine that encompasses the wholeness of that plant. And it always really bothered me at the moment of composting, right? And so well, I did a study abroad trip in Tuscany, Italy, and there was a gentleman there that gave a lecture about specifically Paracelsian alchemy. And I always kind of jokingly say he was like the universal physician, right? He was like an MD and an ND, an acupuncturist and an herbalist and a homeopath and a medical astrologer and an alchemist. And he gave this presentation that like blew my mind. It was pretty incredible. But there he introduced this concept of spagyric pharmacy, which was developed by Paracelsus in the early 1600s, and it as a model for extracting the full plant, what in alchemy is referred to as the three principles within the plant: the sulfur, the mercury, and the salt. And it was that salt principle that's always discarded when
mhm.
we compost that herb. And there's a process whereby those herbs are incinerated down to an ash, and all of the alkaline minerals are extracted and reconstituted back in to the extraction. And so that was the big turning point for me and led me down a pretty serious interest with Western alchemy, specifically from the Paracelsian lineage. So I studied with a man named Robert Bartlett, who turns out lived about 30 minutes away from me, and he's world renowned. He's written some really great books. He was a student of Frater Albertus, who was a really leading figure in the alchemical movement in the United States. And he lived like really close to me. So I started studying with Robert and did all of his coursework and really just started working it in my lab. Um, you know, Built a pretty nice lab to do all of my extractions for our product lines that also I would be using in my clinic. And just really love the way that the alchemical lineage. I always say that the alchemical lineage kind of reclaims the metaphysical backbone of Western herbalism. When we study a lot of those Eastern systems of medicine, they have a cosmology. There's a metaphysical understanding that's overlaid into the system of medicine that gives it a connection to something greater that I
Mhm.
find is lacking in a lot of Western herbalism and Western medicine as a whole, really, because the irony of it is that it was Paracelsus that kind of led to that gradual, I would say, focus on reductionistic science as
Yeah.
alchemy turned into iatrochemistry, turned into chemistry, turned into modern pharmacology. We kind of got into this very reductionistic paradigm in the spirit. The meaning was stripped from the system. And I feel like when we go back to the roots of really of modern science, which is alchemy, it reclaims that metaphysical backbone that I think is I think a lot of people want that. I think a lot of people strive for a deeper connection to the plants that they work with and the people that they work with and even the medicines that they work with. So yeah, that's kind of how I stumbled into the world of alchemy, which is like a huge world. It's really
Yeah.
overwhelming, and there's a lot to it. And so I would say I moved quite slowly through it. Sometimes people find alchemy, they do a couple stuff with plants, and then they jump right into minerals and metals. I haven't really gone into metallic alchemy at all. The plants keep me thoroughly occupied and entertained. So,
Yeah, there's enough there for sure.
yeah.
So, how would you characterize the difference between an extract that you prepare, a spagyric extract, and maybe clarify for me what spagyric means? And because you see
Yeah.
a few different references to spagyrics, and I'm not sure they're all actually spagyrics. Yeah, I think that there
Yeah.
may be aspects of using spagyric approach or philosophy. So, how would they differ from a typical well-made herbal extract?
Yeah, great question. Well, the thing I also like to mention here is that so spagyrics was originally developed by Paracelsus. He invented the word spagyrics. It comes from two Greek words, speo and agiero, which means to, is generally translated to separate and recombine. I have a student from Greece, and she actually went back to the root of those words, and it was very interesting. She said, "Oh, actually, that second half of spagyric, agiero," she goes, "Yeah, to recombine is one way you could say it, but it actually is more closely akin to reawaken," which I
Hmm.
thought was very interesting. As the spagyric process is in many respects symbolically seen as kind of this death and rebirth process that the plant is taken through. But essentially, spagyric refers to plant based alchemy. It refers to a specific set of practices of herbal pharmacy, really. So it's ways of preparing and manufacturing herbs into particular modes of extract, different types of extracts. Um, and of which there are many kinds. So there are
Okay.
many different forms of spagyric extracts, some very simple, some incredibly complex.
Okay.
Um, so what we see with the most basic spagyric is generally referred to as a spagyric tincture. Typically, this is prepared very similarly to any other run-of-the-mill tincture, whereby the plant material is extracted with a compound menstruum of water and alcohol. Optimally, that menstruum should be determined to the constituent profile of the herb.
Hmm.
So, there's some folks out there that just use 95% alcohol on everything. There's some folks that just use 40% vodka on everything.
Hmm.
I am a firm believer in tailoring that menstruum because some plants tend to be more water soluble, some plants are more alcohol soluble. Each one is kind of specific. So I tend to be pretty specific in my menstruums, but the herb is extracted, pressed out after a period of most people in the spagyric world like to do the alchemical month, which would be 40 days and 40 nights. It's kind of biblical references to 40 days and nights. But from there, a standard tincture is usually that plant material or the mark is discarded.
Hmm.
With the spagyrics, that plant material is incinerated to an ash and consecutively ground in a mortar and pestle and fired. So you grind it up real well and fire it, grind it, fire it over and over and over again until you have a very basically you fully oxidized the structural components of the plants, the fiber, the cellulose, and you're just left with the ash, the pure ash, which is kind of the unrefined minerals. From there, the we want to separate the water soluble minerals from the insoluble minerals, which is just done with distilled water. Those are filtered out, and then you evaporate that water to crystallize all of the alkali water soluble salts. And when I say crystallize, I mean literally crystals, like they look like crystals. It's pretty awesome.
Hmm.
And then those alkali minerals are ground to a powder and then cohobated or recombined back in with the tincture. And so the tincturing process in and of itself, alchemically speaking, is said to draw out the sulfur and the mercury of the plant. And when I say sulfur and mercury, I'm not talking about chemical sulfur,
Yeah.
chemical mercury. This is philosophical sulfur and mercury, which in alchemy they say the sulfur is like the soul or the consciousness of the plant. It's kind of its unique individual nature, which tends to manifest physically in volatile oil.
Hmm.
The mercury is the spirit of the plant, or the mind of the plant, the intelligence. It typically manifests as the alcohol and water soluble chemistry within the plant, or the water soluble, alcohol soluble constituents. So the alcohol tincturing draws out sulfur and mercury. And then when you recombine that salt principle, it's said to, you're like putting the plant back in its body. You're reincorporating the mineral matrix, which is the physical delivery for the sulfur and the mercury to enter into the body, that said, that the spagyric will enter more deeply. It kind of opens the body up to receive the sulfur and the mercury on a deeper level. Generally speaking, they're considered to be more effective at lower dosages. Some people can test that one a little bit. I find they tend to work at a slightly lower dose than a typical tincture. And the main thing that I find, and that people that work with them over time find, is that the effect is very noticeable. You tend to just like feel the effect of the plant quite readily,
Right.
which I have found to be one of the main distinguishing characteristics from a more standard extract. And I like, what I like to differentiate too from a lot of standard, especially more in kind of the phytopharmaceutical industry or the nutraceutical world. What you see is the speo side of spagyric, like separate. So we're going to separate a
Hmm.
plant down to curcumin, and it's like
Hmm.
95% curcumin, and we're going to take everything else out and just
Right.
focus on this one isolated constituent or complex of constituents. And we're going to separate but not recombine. And it's interesting because what we tend to find when you do that to a plant is it doesn't really work the same. Like 95% curcumin is not the same thing as whole plant turmeric. And it's interesting that, oh, we find out 95% curcumin, it's barely absorbed. And so now we got to spike it with a bunch of bioperine black pepper
Hmm.
extract to even get it in the body. And it's like, well, in the alchemical way of thinking, it's like nature, that plant grew in a certain environment, and it has a certain elemental composition, it has a certain chemical composition. The way that it's created is in a way perfect unto itself, and there's a biochemical synergy there, right, that is present there. And when you start isolating little minuscule parts of it, it doesn't work. Like the part doesn't do the same thing as the whole when you separate it out like that. And so that's what I love about the spagyric mindset, is that it's concentrating, but it's still holistic. Like you zoom in and get the parts, but then you recombine it back in, you reconstitute it into a state of wholeness again. And so you're getting this concentration, but without reducing it down too much. Like I find it's a very nice balance of those two, if that makes any sense. So
Oh,
yeah.
it makes perfect sense. Yeah. And I really resonate with what you said about the perfect synergy that the plants represent. And, but I mean, at the same time, I mean, foods are available to us. They need to be processed in some way in order for us to digest them. And so that perfect synergy doesn't necessarily exist in a practical way. So these things have to undergo some kind of processing. So I take it though that you do use things like herbal teas and simple extracts, or are you exclusively using spagyrics?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm definitely not. I don't get too hoity-toity about I'm only spagyrics. Definitely still use infusions, decoctions,
Okay.
methods of extract, oil extracts, topical
Mhm.
preparations, things like that. But I think when it comes to in a lot of the internal remedies, like instead of the tincture, I will typically be utilizing spagyric methods of preparation. Yeah.
Right. And you think that the dosage effectiveness is lower, like you can use less.
Yeah, I think it depends on the herb. Obviously different herbs have different dosage ranges, but I'll
Hmm.
usually if say the standard dosage recommendation of an herb is maybe 2 to 3 mils, I'll
Hmm.
maybe start with 1 mil,
I
one and a
see.
half mils, and just see. And I think it really depends. Like the question of dosage, as I'm sure you know, is so fluid. There is no, like, to me, there is no one, like, every herb should be dosed at this much. I
Hmm.
think each herb, and even with the person we're working with, I think different people have different metabolic states. Some people are really sensitive. Some people are maybe not quite so sensitive. Some people are bigger. Some people are smaller. So I tend to kind of adjust dosage ranges depending on the person. But of course, that said, I'm not going to give someone 5 mils of phytolacca or anything like that, right? It's like, so some of the, especially with those lower dose herbs, I tend to keep those pretty tight
Yeah.
to their more traditional dosage ranges. But for a lot of remedies, I will start a little bit lower and just see how it works with people. I'd rather give people less and build up to more than start with too much and have to taper down.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you of the school, or do you include within your practice the so-called drop doses? Some people recommend just a few drops, even not even ingested, just dropped onto the wrist or whatever. Is that part of your dosing strategy too, or?
I don't really do that too much.
Hmm.
The only thing that I administer in drop dosage would be the spagyric essences, which is a significantly more concentrated extract. That process, it's a bit involved, but in that process, you get what we would say is a full separation of the sulfur, mercury, and salt of the herb. So the
Hmm.
plant goes through multiple processes of distillation, where
Hmm.
we're, say, distilling off the volatile oil. We'll ferment the herb into a wine and then
Hmm.
distill the alcohol off the wine. So rather than pouring alcohol over it to tincture, we actually make our own alcohol from that herb.
Oh,
And
wow.
then there's a couple different salts that are calcined and crystallized, and then those three parts get recombined. Those are pretty potent. I usually don't exceed 5 drop doses for those, just because they are quite strong. Even herbs that maybe typically would be dosed at 3 mils, 5 mils in an essence form, I'm usually still going to only give 5 drops, just because they're pretty strong. Even chamomile, 5 drops of chamomile essence is like, it's very strong. Yeah, you feel
Wow.
I never really thought that chamomile could be like really sedative,
Hmm.
but taking up of that spagyric essence, it's like, wow, you feel noticeably tired from it. It's interesting. Yeah.
What would the extract ratio be for something like that?
Yeah, it depends on the herb. I've never actually done the math
Mm.
to calculate it out, because what ends up happening is variable amounts of final distillate on the alcohol.
Hmm.
So, depending on the starting amount of herb, yeah, it gets complicated with the starting amount of herb versus the distillate yield. So sometimes
Hmm.
it'll vary from batch to batch. But I've actually never taken the time to sit down and calculate it out.
No worries. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the process. You're calcinating the herb and then you're grinding it in a mortar and pestle. And I remember when I've taken students to Nepal and we were learning how to make some of these traditional remedies. And of course, some of the basic grinding was done with a machine, but then it was in the mortar and pestle, and we'd be grinding for days. I couldn't believe it, like be 3 hours straight, and then the Vita would come by and he would look and say, no, no, another couple of days. And you're like, your arms ready to fall off. I'm just curious, how have you modernized your approach? I mean, you produce so much stuff. Is there been a way to like use more advanced techniques or technology to augment or enhance this process, or are you
Yeah.
fastidious and follow a tradition for particular things?
Yeah. I try to keep a balance with it.
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't know. I have kind of a weird relationship with technology, because like I use it for my business, like it's a necessary part of my business, but I really try to keep things as low tech as possible, but also trying to factor in efficiency. So we certainly use equipment typically for the rendering down of the plant material. So we have some processing equipment, like, large cutter mixers that we use, rendering down 50 pounds of roots.
Right.
To get it down to a good particle reduction, basically size reduction. We use an incinerator to incinerate the plants in. It used to all be done in a fireplace,
Mm-hmm.
just a wood burning stove. But we, for compliance sake and good manufacturing practices,
Mm-hmm.
moved over to a little bit more of a, little bit of a cleaner setup there for the incinerations. We use pottery kilns
Oh,
for calcinations. But when it comes to grinding, that's the one part where I'm like, grind by hand. We still
really?
more pestle. Yeah, we still grind by hand. Yeah, we could probably run them through blenders or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. There's something about the act of the physical grinding of the salts
Mm-hmm.
that's one piece where I kind of want to maintain that part. There's something about the manual action of grinding the salts that I like. The people that I have helping me in the lab actually kind of enjoy that part of the process too. And it's not too labor intensive. Like typically once you incinerate an herb, you maybe spend 5-10 minutes grinding that up real fine before it's ready for an additional firing. It doesn't really take hours and hours of time. And honestly, if we were to do it in like a blender, we would probably spend more time having to clean in between each batch than we would even just grinding it with the pestle. So yeah, it's an interesting balance of having some modern equipment, but also trying to maintain a little bit of that hands-on, you know. Yeah.
It's cool that you maintain that tradition. And of course, the mortar and pestle is kind of representative of these male and female energies that you're infusing into the product itself.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. So you also practice medical astrology. And how does that weave into your practice of alchemy and herbal medicine generally?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I never expected to get into that. It wasn't like I'm going to go study medical astrology. It was well, in alchemy, a big part of the teachings in alchemy is some of the primary ways that the plants are classified in the alchemical tradition is based on planetary associations.
Hmm.
And there's just, you go in alchemy books, there'd be these big lists of here's all the herbs ruled by Mercury and Jupiter and
Hmm.
Saturn and the
Hmm.
sun. And I would always look at those lists and I'd be like, what is this all about? And it's they kind of annoyed me a little bit, honestly. I would like look at these lists and be like, well, what the hell? Like, okay, how are you determining that this plant relates to that planet? And
Right.
no, there wasn't ever really anything clearly explained. Like, here's
Hmm.
the criteria. So I really kind of went back to the drawing board with it. And over the last decade, have kind of been creating a system for determining correlations between plants and planets based on traditional medical astrology associations of the body. So in Western, traditional Western tropical medical astrology, the 12 signs of the zodiac are correlated to the organ systems and tissues of the body. The planets also have organ rulerships, but also certain, they tend to, we would say, generate certain tissue dynamics within the organ systems. So the planets kind of, as planets reside inside signs, they generate a particular, we would say, tissue state within that part of the body. But they also have psychological representations too, as most people are aware of. And that's what really drew me to when I started getting it. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Talking about being holistic is that, oh, here we have a system. I can look at someone's birth chart and we can look at this and say, okay, here is the nature of the body. Here's the excesses, the deficiencies, the strengths, the weaknesses, the potential predispositions towards disease. And from that, we can generate a preventative approach, which is one thing I really like about it.
Hmm.
But we can also say, oh, looking at that same map, this is the structure of the psyche. This is the psychological temperament, the emotional temperament. Even in more of a modern evolutionary astrology approach, they would say, kind of the chart is representing in a way the lessons the soul is meant to learn in this lifetime in order to further in its spiritual development or its evolution. But it's all the same map. And so it allows you to really see that the dotted line between what's going on in the body and then how that is being reflected psychologically, emotionally, and even spiritually. So the chart becomes a very useful tool for observing a person through that holistic lens. So the way astrology kind of plays into my work is, on the one hand, it's an assessment tool, really. At the bottom,
Okay.
at kind of the bottom line of it is that it's an assessment tool, and I think a lot of people really misunderstand the medical astrology piece in the work that I do. It's not, I don't do astrology readings for people, right? I don't sit and with the chart and lay it out and do a reading the way a lot of people think of an astrology reading. For me, the chart is just another assessment tool that's right
Mhm.
there with assessment of the pulse, the tongue, the constitution, doing a really good in-depth intake and interview, assessing their blood work and doing blood work analysis, all of that stuff. It's, to me, the herbalist should have as many tools available in their toolkit to be able to just figure out like what is going on with this person. um, as herbalists, we don't always have access to all the fancy modern diagnostic tools that a modern doctor has. And so I think having as many different lenses to view into the body as we can with these traditional assessment tools, the better. So that's the way I work with it. I typically will do my intake with a person, and then when I'm doing when I'm just reviewing the case or I'm kind of putting things together, I'll have the chart there, and it's really just a part of
Mm.
clarifying, say, the tissue state or the constitutional pattern or organ system strengths, weaknesses, excess deficiencies, all just observing that, what might be a contributing factor to the onset, the progress. Sometimes you can see the progression, how long it might go, when it might
Mm.
what's the word, when it might start to remediate, meaning when certain qualities are going to move through an organ system and then move out of it, and the person might start to feel better. So it kind of can give you a bit of a lens into not just what's going on right now, but how it might progress into the future. And of course, the chart also gives insight into what we might use to balance or remediate those astral influences that are seen as, I wouldn't say positive necessarily, sometimes causative, but at least contributing factors. So
Right.
there's the person side, and then there's the plant side, which is kind of classifying the remedies, how the plants will influence, especially the planets. And I've been kind of in the process recently of kind of reworking my whole take on the system, because for a very long time, the system has been, oh, this herb is ruled by the sun. You've got
Mm.
angelica and arnica and St. John's wort are all ruled by the sun. Well, those three herbs are very different herbs.
Mhm.
Um, I've been thinking rather, okay, let's maybe get a little bit more specific in the classification schema. So lately I've been kind of working my way through a potential model of, rather than Angelica is ruled by the sun, we would say, oh, we have subcategories of, say, herbs that build the sun. They are increasing in that quality. They are eliminators or decreasing of that quality, or they're maybe like neutrals. And so that's kind of drawing from William Lasassier's triune system of classification that I learned from David Winston. And I remember learning all that system from David and thinking, wow, that makes a lot of sense. They kind of do it with organ systems as an herb, a builder, neutral, or eliminator to a
Mhm.
certain organ system. But I thought, well, that really would be a really good approach to thinking through planetary classification.
Mm.
And it kind of fits in the triune model of astrology, cardinal, mutable, fixed. So thinking of an herb being kind of cardinal, mutable, fixed to a certain planet. So yeah, anyways, I've been kind of I've been in a little bit of a research project and experimenting with that classification schema to try to get it a little more specific as to what the herb actually does.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's a little bit on the medical astrology piece.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It sounds like you use a combination of like the birth chart with the transit chart then. Is that true to kind of
Correct.
determine what's happening?
Correct. Yeah, and kind of to tie in a little bit of Ayurvedic thinking to it, to like in Ayurveda, right? And I probably mispronounced the word, so pardon my mispronunciation. Prakriti and Vikruti, right? You have the core constitutional and then the assumed constitutional pattern.
Yeah.
To me, that is kind of represented in the chart, that natal chart. It's like the blueprint that we were born into,
Hmm.
right? So you were born, we take that first breath, all those celestial influences kind of stamp their influence on us. That's the nature of the person, right? That core nature of the person, that core constitution. But then everything changes, right? Everything is
Hmm.
moving and we adapt to our environment, to our surroundings, to the foods we eat, and our ecosystem we live in, right? And then that pattern change, kind of the layers of the onions, right, are kind of put on top, and we assume different constitutional patterns. Then that can be seen through the transits. So I think that's kind of one of the ways I like to think of it. Yeah, it is typically natal transits. Some medical astrologers use progressions. I haven't really gotten too into that as of yet. Maybe someday, but I find transits and natal chart can, get a lot of information out of that for sure.
That's fascinating. It's a cool assessment tool to add into your toolbox there of all the different things that you do. And I like that you're making sure to get a proper clinical assessment, right? So it's not your primary assessment tool. It's not the first thing you're doing, but you're taking them through a typical consultation will involve an actual objective analysis of what's happened to them based on their signs and symptoms. So you bring in that objective clinical component, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, without it, to me, without it, it's just kind of not a guessing game, but it just, I
Mhm.
mean, as you know, when you're working with a lot of people, you kind of got to be efficient with your time. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have time to just sit it with a chart and be like, I wonder what's going on here. It's like when I do the intake, I already have a pretty good idea, like what's going on. I have a developing theory in my mind. I already know what the major organ systems that are, need to be considered and looked at. So then when I go to the chart, I know exactly where to look, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, someone's got a bunch of neurological things going on. Immediately, I'm looking like Gemini, Sagittarius, Mercury, Uranus. Like, what's going on with that in the chart? Because I know those are the rulers, primary rulers of the nervous system, neurological things. I had a patient like that very recently where he was having all these really kind of bizarre, what to me seemed like neurological symptoms. Um, I went to the chart and looked at it and saw all this stuff going on. Gemini, Sagittarius, Uranus in the natal chart, transits afflicting it, and to me it looked serious, and I say, hey, you need to go to the doctor. Like, you need to go get checked.
Mhm.
I need you to go get some scans. You need to get checked. So I think something's going on here. I didn't want to say anything because we're not allowed to diagnose, but I had a theory in my mind, and it turned out to be correct. And he ended up being diagnosed with pretty progressive multiple sclerosis. He had lesions on his brain. He had lesions on his spine, and it was progressing really, really rapidly. It was really through observing the chart that kind of clarified the severity of it. At first I was like, oh, these are kind of bizarre. Well, maybe we'll had some remedies in mind. And then I looked at the chart and was like, whoa, 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 this looks way more serious. So I think it can just give that extra. I think as herbalists, sometimes they need that confirmation,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
sometimes to see that confirmation in a way external to just
Right.
your own thinking about the situation, right? I think it'd be really helpful. So yeah, I think it's a very useful tool. It's not for everybody, but it is a very, very practical, useful tool. And I think that's the point I like to emphasize when I talk about medical astrology. I think people kind of picture this like, ooh, crystal ball predicting their future, and it's not like that. It's very practical. It's very mechanical. It's not this super woo-woo esoteric thing. It is
Mm,
like very, very pragmatic. It is very much aligned with the foundations of traditional herbalism, right? I mean, it's
mm,
based off of the four elements. It's
mhm,
like
mhm,
earth, water, air, and fire in
mhm,
three modes. It's active and cardinal or kind of pitta-like. It's mutable and dynamic and changeable, like kind of vata-like, and it's fixed, it's stable, it's solid, it's inertia, or kind of kappa-like. It's like the
mhm,
system is there's a lot of overlap. And so, yeah, we could say pitta aggravation or heat excitation or, a choleric excess, or
mhm,
we could say
mhm.
it's too much Mars. They're all different ways of saying the same thing. It's like
Right.
it's just how is nature reflecting in that person. So it's really not that different from a lot of other holistic traditional assessment systems, really. Just different language. Yeah.
Yeah, I think speaks to the holistic paradigm that allows you to shift in and out of perspectives while linking them together, even if they're seemingly different or contradictory. And that's the challenge. We have just a few minutes left, but I want to ask you one question because you're such a master in this area and applying this holistic perspective, but we live in this reductionist culture. So how do you manage that? Like, have you had any experiences or challenges in manifesting these principles of holism? It could be in your own life, it could be in your practice, it could be in advising patients, because we're all kind of facing this sort of fundamental duality or dichotomy, like, we're all wrapped up in this sort of, post-capitalist industrial society that just fragments our understanding of our own world. So we're
Mm,
faced with this challenge. I'm sure you are too. So we all struggle with it, but I'm wondering
totally.
how do you manage that? How do you understand that?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, man. I mean, it's a challenge, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
there's so much distraction in this modern world, and I just really strive to be disciplined. I think for
Mhm.
me, it's like a mental discipline specifically with technology. It's kind of the irony and paradox of my work is like an herbalist and a nature person and an earth person and a homesteader, and I'm running an online business. And so it ends
Mhm.
up being a lot of time in front of a computer, a lot of time sitting in front of a camera. And
Mhm.
for me, it's a constant striving to really like simply go outside and be on the land. I live up in the mountains. I live in nature, so I feel really blessed to be able to be surrounded by the beauty of nature. I think my kids really help me with
Mhm.
this too, like the kids are just like just so simple and real and like, Papa, let's go kick the ball around or let's go swing and just go outside. And for me, I mean, I think for me, becoming a father really like shifted something huge in me of realizing like what's important and the importance of just what's real, like what's
Right.
really real in this world. And what is real is our food, is our water, is the earth, is the air that we breathe, is our family. And like that's it for me. And that's what
Mhm.
really keeps me, I think, stable and solid and grounded and try not to get all caught up in everything that's going on out there. It's like I can only attend to what's in my immediate sphere right here and trying to make that good, and we really strive to maintain that too through our lifestyle of being homesteaders. We raise all of our own meat here. We haven't had to buy any meat from the grocery store in many years. We raise most of our own food. We don't go to the store for 4 or 5 months out of the year. It's just all coming off of the land. And that, it's really through the efforts of my wife, Whitney. And so that's kind of our way of really trying to, in a way, it's kind of funny. It's like for us, it's like, oh, it feels like a good way forward is kind of trying to conserve and preserve a traditional way of life of how we live on this earth and being kind of responsible for our food and for our water is kind of what it boils down to for us. And but then how do you balance that with technology? Yeah, trying to do that, trying to figure out how to do that with kids too. It's like, oh, how do you do that? It's like I'm not going to stick my kid in front of an iPad but he knows it exists. They know
Hmm.
there's this thing called Wi-Fi, but it's like, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It's like, because you know, it's like, yeah, it's just interesting. It's an interesting time to be alive for sure. I think it comes down to remembering our connection to nature. To me, it's really kind of comes back to that simple, like simple, put the phone down, like just leave the phone somewhere. Like we don't need that dang phone. I remember a life before the phone.
Yeah.
Like it was good then too, you know, and
Yeah.
I think it comes down to a disciplined mind of like not letting that technology become addictive because it is very addictive. I think for people, and I think it kind of replaces our own mind in a way. It replaces our own thought, like our own ability to figure things out, our own
Hmm.
ability to navigate like figuratively and literally, like, you know, our own ability to memorize a number, you know, all those
Hmm.
kinds of
Hmm.
things. It's like our mind, it's like I always kind of joke around as like, oh, the smartphone's going to make us dumb because we're going to put all of our intelligence, you know, it's going to replace our thinking, and that's dangerous, right? And
Yeah.
so I really try to, you know, try to find a balance with all of it. And it's challenging. I struggle with it, but yeah, those are some of the thoughts that come to my mind. I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered the question, but
Well, no, I don't think there is an answer. It's just curious to hear how people try to reconcile these issues because we're all dealing with it, right? And we all have to
yeah,
kind of rest in this place of contradiction out of
yeah.
necessity. But then how do we develop an attitude which is holistic, right? And it sounds like some of it for you is just realigning yourself with those experiences and values that you hold in your connection to the natural world, which I think is the great reconciler, right? Like when all said and done, like all the things that we struggle with, if you can just reconnect back to nature, then you can become back in alignment, right? And yeah, so you set such a wonderful example. And Seja, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I've really appreciated it.
Oh, Todd, it was really great to spend this time with you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It was really great to be here and great to reconnect with you after so long. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you.